I remember saying, "Oh no, it can't be. None of these things could ever happen. They would never do these things." Well, I was wrong. It's catastrophic for us. We have to be, if we're going to survive on this planet, we have to be Americans first.
So Douglas Macgregor comes out swinging here on Daniel Davis's podcast, calling the U.S. relationship with Israel catastrophic. And in this clip, he explains why the U.S. relationship with Israel has been disastrous, is still disastrous, and it never pays a dividend to the American citizens that finance it, ultimately through taxation. So he's one of the greatest analysts when it comes to the Middle East, as far as I'm concerned. So let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The United States also has a credibility question when it comes to Israel, which you've already alluded to here earlier today. There is a big issue right now, which is finally belatedly getting lots of international focus, and that is on some starvation of a large number, or growing number anyway, of Palestinians on top of the death and destruction they receive from normal conventional means. And Trump was asked that at the same press conference when he was in the UK, what he thought about the claim that food was being blocked from the Palestinians.
We want to get the children fed. We made a contribution a week ago of $60 million, all going into food. We only hope the food goes to the people that need it, because so much, as you know, when you do something there, it gets taken by Hamas or somebody, but it gets taken. But and we're prepared to help. We want to help. It's a terrible situation.
He talks about that in the passive sense. It's a terrible situation, like we're powerless to do anything, but we're supposed to be the most powerful nation on earth, and yet these people are literally starving to death. What do you make of that?
Between 1929 and 1932, there is an estimate that somewhere between 7 and 9 million Ukrainians were systematically starved, murdered, shot, deported by the NKVD under a man named Yagoda. There was also a Genrik who was with him at some point. These were NKVD types. People knew about it who lived on the borders. In other words, there were people in Poland and people in Germany, certainly in the Baltic states. They were aware of this mass starvation. It wasn't the first one. They'd murdered millions of people before this by starvation. This was just the largest example. It wasn't just Ukrainians, murdered millions of Russians as well. Stalin had a solution to the problem to ensure that people got the right impression. And he sat down with Beria, and they decided to paint all the trucks working for the NKVD black, and then stenciled on either side of the truck the word meat. Of course, that was a joke, because these wagons would show up in front of apartment buildings and homes in the middle of the night. They would go in and get people. They went into the meat wagon and never returned.
Yeah, you can see the obvious parallels here, and this is eerie because what we've had, especially over the last month, is aid stations being set up in Gaza, and then Palestinians coming out of their hiding places, justifiably so, hiding from U.S. and Israeli bombs in this genocide. They get out and into these aid lines, and IDF soldiers take the opportunity to kill many of them in those cases. I think the number of that is up to 1,000 or so now. More people than Hamas murdered on October 7th have died in these targeted strikes waiting for aid. I don't think Trump cares that much about the aid. If he did, he would condemn Israel and the IDF for taking these opportunities to pick people off in these lines. It's totally ghastly. It's absurd. And even some mainstream media accounts in the United States are reporting on this. It's impossible to avoid, but what's happening there is catastrophic. And yeah, they're selling it as a propaganda scheme that, hey, we really want them to have aid. There's no starvation, even though there's plentiful amounts of videos coming out of Gaza showing obvious malnutrition and obvious starving people who had their limbs blown off, often cases too, by the way, by Israel. Funded by the U.S., of course.
They were either executed or shipped off to the Gulag. We don't know how many millions of people lost their lives that way. But I think that what's important is that journalists at the time in Moscow reported and wrote back to the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and said, Stalin is doing such a wonderful job of feeding his population.
Oh,
Moscow
wow.
is completely supplied with meat. Everywhere you look, there are meat trucks. Of course, the people in Moscow knew what was happening, but no one was going to say anything lest they too end up in the meat truck.
Yeah, one of these American journalists was Walter Durante, who went over there and said, hey, don't believe the rumors. There's no starvation campaign here. There's no Holodomor, which he's referencing here, that's starving the peoples of what's now Ukraine. That doesn't exist. That's not true. It's all a bunch of propaganda designed to make you think that they're not being helped right here. And hey, the people are well fed, they look good, but no, a mass starvation campaign was taking place, and Durante should have known better. He was in close proximity to it. So you can see how these propaganda cases spiral out of control, especially when it involves war and players in wars that, the mainstream media doesn't always explain in the proper context.
I guess what I'm saying is what happened in Ukraine and what's happening today in Gaza are very much the same. And the same kinds of people, in this case, Mr. Netanyahu and his friends, are essentially perpetrating or proselytizing using the same lies. It's tragic, but these are just lies. And most people are willing to believe them because they want to believe them. I mean, I had a lot of trouble at the beginning with what was going on over there because I've been to Israel several times and I like the Israelis. I particularly like the senior military leadership, thought very highly of them. I remember saying, oh, no, that can't be. None of these things could ever happen. They would never do these things. Well, I was wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had that same response that Macgregor did to these disasters. A lot of Americans, especially on the right, kind of innately always supported Israel because they just thought that, hey, that's the only functioning democracy in the Middle East, that respects human rights. Of course, when it comes to respecting human rights, it kind of depends on which side of the wall you're on, right? If you're on the Gaza side of the wall, you don't exactly have your rights respected, and actually, you have a genocide perpetrated against you. But that was the line of reasoning a lot of people used to support Israel. But, we know now that Israel's response to Hamas is completely out of proportion. It's haywire. This is a rogue state with Netanyahu trying to do everything he can to distract from the fact that there are fraud and corruption charges against him. And I guess to make war with as many powers as possible, expand as many West Bank settlements as he can in the name of the Greater Israel Project, that will save his skin. But this is just unavoidable, and I think posterity will look back on this with horror, realizing everyone that was complicit in this were completely maniacal and devilish and just dreadful in their application of foreign policy in this corner of the world where the U.S. shouldn't belong at all. So that's where we're at right now, and hey, a lot of people have had their eyes open to these atrocities because of the independent media, which hasn't existed before really in the U.S. history.
But I think a lot of other people still want desperately to believe. And you have Ambassador Huckabee, who comes on and makes outrageous statements that don't make any sense. And surely he knows better. I don't know how they managed to do that sort of thing. The Israel First group is, to a man, anti-Russian. And this has to do with the histories of their backgrounds and their families and their hatred for Russia and Orthodox Christianity. It's just a waste of time listening to these people. We have to be, if we're going to survive on this planet, we have to be Americans first. And America first needs to be our guide.
Amen. That's what I believe too, or really preferably America only, instead of getting embroiled in these fruitless affairs overseas. And Macgregor is right. Actually, the Israel lobby is pretty staunchly supportive of aid to Ukraine as well. I think it just goes beyond kind of historical connections. Actually, I think it is a diversionary tactic to get eyes off of what's happening in Gaza, which is a genocide. And that's part of the reason that the Israel lobby supports it. But the entire neocon establishment supports endless aid to both without conditions, and the military-industrial complex is wrapped up in it as well. And who finances all of it? The central banks, the bankers are all for this too, profiting off the debt that's accumulated in the name of Americans that finance this. You know, we've plunged ourselves, shouldn't say we, I don't want to be complicit with the criminal government that's done this, but our government has plunged us 37 trillion in debt over these kind of wars, and, you know, other things go into it too, absurd corporate welfare and things like that. And there's really no way out except for disengagement. That's the real America First way. And I think that's what Macgregor's getting to, and I support that.
That's why people went out and voted for Trump. What was an act of faith? He said the right things and people wanted to believe he was serious. He wasn't. He lied. It's all a myth. And so we're involved in agendas like Browder's, whether it's in Russia or operations that are going on now in the Middle East. Right now, you've got these people that are trying to build this corridor that runs from Israel through Syria, along the border with Iran, all the way up to Azerbaijan, in order to sort of circle Iran and split ultimately through Azerbaijan, Russia from Iran. I mean, all this stuff is interconnected. All the same people are behind this stuff.
Yeah, like I said, the Israel lobby, the America First crowd, or the Israel First crowd, the military-industrial complex, all working in tandem to make sure that there's lucrative money streams to those benefiting off of this. And they just want another Afghanistan, but with higher stakes this time. And I say higher stakes because this is a nuclear power you're fighting a proxy war against. That's Russia. They have the most nuclear warheads in supply, more than the United States. And they want brinksmanship with Russia if it means this continual washing of money from the tax base of the United States to the rich and powerful in the banks and military-industrial complex. That's true for Ukraine, and that's true for Israel.
It's catastrophic for us. It's irrelevant to us. You know, our interest should be in doing business with people on an equitable basis where we prosper and they prosper.
Yes.
That's about it. Now, you involve yourself in all of these strategies that are coming out of Israel and out of Kiev and out of New York City and London. You end up in a position where you could go to war at the drop of a hat with Russia and China that could turn nuclear. And people don't seem to get that. We're operating in other people's backyards that matter to them. These places don't matter to us.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And there is no victor during a nuclear winter. And that's what would occur if BRICS clashes against NATO and this whole thing turns into a nuclear war. That's the worst possible scenario, something that I hope to be averted at all costs. But I don't think my government is helping to avert that. I think my government is criminal and it's trying to fan the flames of that. Look, people call me and people like Douglas Macgregor isolationists for having the views we do on foreign policy, which is basically sanity instead of waging wars and regime change operations and military strikes in every corner of the world. But in reality, I want diplomacy with other countries. I want the U.S. to be up front and center in those diplomatic engagements with other powers. And I want trade. I want vociferous free trade with no tariffs, no sanctions on other countries. And that makes me an isolationist in some regard. Well, I actually think that the neocons isolate themselves a little bit more from the rest of the world with these fruitless forever wars that they support constantly in terms of whoever Israel wants to overthrow, in terms of the clean break strategy. That includes Iraq and Syria and Libya and Iran, which the U.S. got involved in recently. And that includes Ukraine, where the U.S. is distancing itself from Russia far more than it ever has since the Cold War. And really, this is a new Cold War, and it was deliberately chosen by the U.S. and NATO to be another Cold War. The moment they decided to expand NATO to Russia's borders, they overthrew the regime, and Ukraine pulled out of the INF treaty, bombed Serbia for 42 days, and said, you know, screw you when Putin said put it in writing that Ukraine won't be part of NATO. Well, guess what? Ukraine shouldn't be part of NATO, just as much as Mexico shouldn't be part of BRICS. If Russia tried to instigate that kind of political maneuver in Mexico, the U.S. would have a sincere problem with it, and I think for good reason. So this is just a catastrophe. Support for Israel's been a catastrophe, and despite the ownership that the Israel lobby has over our political class, over the political establishment in the media, and our elected representatives, that's not going to change unless there's a cultural sea change. And I think that is beginning to happen. I think more people are awakening to the fact that the Israel first mentality hasn't served the interests of America. You see it on the right with people like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and other people being willing to talk about this and go up in front of Charlie Kirk's foundation, Turning Point USA, and make a speech saying that, and saying you didn't vote for this, and saying that it's not anti-Semitic to say this. You know, that is a huge moment. He got cheers for that at Turning Point. People are waking up to this, especially younger people. Older people aren't as much. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions. I know there are exceptions that watch this show, but we're seeing a change in mentalities, and I think that part of it's a good thing. But I do want to hear from you below. Let me know, do you agree with Colonel Macgregor? Is support for Israel a total backward idea? What should be the U.S. solution to getting disengaged from the Middle East? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Daniel Davis. He does awesome interviews like this one. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you'll help support the channel, and I'll give you access to all of my future videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.